We have injury updates with Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, McCarthy, Brock Purdy, Jaden Daniels, Aaron Jones, and even some under-the-radar offensive line injuries that I think are very important to discuss here. Starting in San Francisco, obviously, we had the Purdy injury last week, and what we were told is Purdy was going to be missing about 4 or 5 weeks from this turf toe. And once Purdy does come back, you actually will have Purdy limited, especially as a rusher. So for me, if you're playing in shallower formats where people are only rostering one quarterback per team, I would strongly consider dropping Brock Purdy unless you can put him on the IR. But looking at the pass catchers here, really didn't know what to expect with Mac Jones, but CMC came out and McCaffrey was still very easily a top 3 running back in fantasy with his total opportunities. You had 20 opportunities, and as a receiver, he comes through with about 17 fantasy points, not even including anything with his rushing volume. So CMC is still going to be a top 3 running back in our weekly rankings going into the future. The only concern that you'll have with McCaffrey is if the calf ends up getting tweaked. Now, something that just got tweaked is actually Juwan Jennings. I mean, his entire body has bruises all over it. If you ever played like one of the WWE wrestling games and you saw your body parts that were like red, yellow, every single thing on Jennings' body at this point is yellow. He did manage to play 87% of the snaps in week 2. He scored about 20 fantasy points. Now, because of the laundry list of injuries that we are seeing Jennings deal with, I'm still going to be ranking Ricky Pearsall ahead of him, and I am still not interested in starting Juwan Jennings this next week with Mac Jones under center. Ricky Pearsall only scored about 9 fantasy points this past week. Through the first 2 weeks, he's only had 13 total targets, but it is encouraging that he played 89% of the snaps with no George Kittle, and it looks like that's going to be the highest career snap rate that he's had. So Ricky Pearsall, borderline desperation flex play. Jennings, if he's getting in full practices, then maybe at that point I can be more excited and I can move him up the rankings. But for now, I think we're going to be a little bit hesitant until we end up getting Purdy back into this offense. Now, the big thing that we are going to have to discuss with these rankings updates will be the Cincinnati Bengals. So obviously the word is we are not going to have Joe Burrow for the next 3 months. Now, if they say that Joe Burrow is not playing the next 3 months, what that means is we're probably not seeing Joe Burrow again this fantasy football season. Now, of course, maybe he comes back for the real life playoffs, but realistically speaking, you cannot bank on Ja'Marr Chase having Joe Burrow again in your fantasy lineup. T. Higgins having Joe Burrow again in your fantasy lineup. So with that in mind, I'm going to be ranking them as if Browning's going to be their quarterback going into the future. There are a couple different outs that we could have here. One, if this team were to trade for Jameis Winston, fireworks. Ja'Marr Chase, immediately the number 1 overall player in fantasy yet again. T. Higgins goes right back to being a top 12 wide receiver. They could also go after Kirk Cousins. Obviously, that's been a name that's been thrown out there. Now, we've also seen them say that they could go after Malik Willis. That would be an absolute disaster. But for now, we are going to rank it as if they have Jake Browning, because that's what we've seen them do in the past when you've had Joe Burrow injured. And looking at this, we actually have a pretty large sample of games with and without Joe Burrow for Ja'Marr Chase dating back to 2021. We've seen 7 games with no Joe Burrow for Chase, and in those 7 contests, we've seen his receptions per game fall from 6.64 down to 4.43. We've seen his receiving touchdowns per game fall from 0.8 to 0.14. We've seen his targets per game fall from about 10 to about 6, and we've seen his receiving yards per game fall from 91 to 58, ultimately leading to his points per game almost being cut in half. That is terrifying. Now, I completely understand, obviously, that Ja'Marr Chase looked great with no Joe Burrow this past week. Trust me, he dropped 36 points on my head. I know firsthand experience how good Ja'Marr Chase was this past week. But going into the future, we're lowering expectations dramatically. I already had CeeDee Lamb ranked as the wide receiver 1 after what we saw the first week of the season, but I'm also going to be moving Puka Nacua ahead of Ja'Marr Chase. I am also going to be moving Malik Neighbors ahead of Chase. While Neighbors still has some massive quarterback question marks on his own right, Chase has those same quarterback question marks, but on top of that, you're having to deal with T. Higgins, where Malik Neighbors realistically has no actual competition. Then when we're going to go over and we're going to look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's a wide receiver that just is going to be in a much better offense with more consistent target volume. So I'm going to be going with St. Brown at 4. Jamar Chase is my 5th wide receiver. We'll talk about Justin Jefferson in just 1 second. But going over and looking at T. Higgins actually played in 2020 as well with Joe Burrow. So we've seen a larger sample of Higgins with and without Burrow. And with Burrow, he's averaged about 15 points per game. Without Burrow, that's fallen to about 11.5 to 12 fantasy points per contest. So I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 1, or at least he was my wide receiver 1 before the Joe Burrow injury. I really hope that I'm wrong here. I really hope the Bengals make a play for another quarterback. But until then, I'm going to be moving T. Higgins down the rankings to wide receiver 24 as somebody that's just a borderline flex play that you probably get some big spike weeks from, but ultimately is not going to be that consistent wide receiver 1 producer for us. Now, I do want to move over to a player that, let's talk about 2 running backs right now that I just had to nuke in the rankings, and they're not even related to injuries, and we'll get back to the injured guys. Caleb Johnson, RIP. We actually have him with 0.1 fantasy points so far this season. He's had a total of 2 carries for -1 rushing yards. And he pretty much cost the Pittsburgh Steelers the game this past week. I moved Caleb Johnson down to the range of like handcuffed running backs like Tyler Algier, Rashad White, Brian Robinson. Tyrone Tracy just got nuked. That's a different conversation. So if you're in a shallower format and you want to drop Caleb Johnson, I was saying don't do it after week 1, but honestly, I'm not going to fault you at all if you want to move on from him. Now, deeper leagues, you still hold on to him and hope that he's fine. And then going over and looking at Isaiah Pacheco, rest in peace, Pacheco. It's not time to cut Pacheco because he still has averaged over 50% of the snaps for the Kansas City Chiefs this year. And maybe with the wide receivers coming back into this offense and easier matchups for Pacheco, all of a sudden the Chiefs can turn the corner and they can be a good rushing football team again. But we saw Pacheco look horrendous all of last year after the injury. Pacheco has looked horrendous all of this season so far. So Pacheco, he's done. Dust in the wind. Keep him on your bench just in case I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. I'm going to be wrong again. But I moved him down to my RB36 in the same range as Byshell Tootin, Ramondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, and Nick Chubb. Now let's move over to the other big injury story that we have. JJ McCarthy is going to be out 2 to 4 weeks with a high ankle sprain. Now, I can already hear you in the comment section going, oh my gosh, Mason, Carson Wentz is better than McCarthy. Don't you know how bad McCarthy? I understand. JJ McCarthy's looked horrible over the past 2 weeks. But ultimately, even if McCarthy has been a quarterback averaging about 150 passing yards per game, and he's had 3 interceptions to only 2 passing touchdowns, if you have Justin Jefferson, if you have Jordan Addison, if you have TJ Hawkinson like I do, you need McCarthy to get the reps in. You need McCarthy to get these struggles out early. That way, hopefully, by the time we get to the second half of the season, JJ McCarthy is a much better quarterback than he otherwise would be. Because now you're going to get Carson Wentz in here, and just possibly Carson Wentz can come through and Carson Wentz can be slightly better than McCarthy was. But where does that leave us? It's going to be the JJ McCarthy show yet again in week 6. And then we're going to have the same horrendous quarterback play that we did before. So I just nuked these 3 Vikings in my rankings. And honestly, you can see this with the My Teams page on flogfantasy.com. I was previously the number 1 team in the league in terms of the power rankings, but after T. Higgins getting nuked and after TJ Hawkinson getting nuked, I've actually fallen down to being, I believe, the 3rd or 4th highest ranked team according to the site. Now, of course, if you want to see where you are in your league's power rankings, it's completely free over there on flogfantasy.com. If you play on ESPN, if you play on Yahoo, if you play on Sleeper, you can link your league, you can see the best waiver wire options, and you can see where you stack up positionally at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. I apologize, we don't have kickers or defenses on the site, but that's completely free, and I'm going to leave the link in the description and comment section. But looking at what we have with Jefferson now, Jefferson through the first 2 weeks has been horrendous. I mean, you've seen him average about 11, 12, 13 fantasy points per game. But ultimately, if it wasn't for the receiving touchdown and the one decent quarter that we had from McCarthy in week 1, Jefferson would be under 10 points per game. I have moved Jefferson down from being a tier S wide receiver down to our wide receiver 6 in our rest of season ranks. I have him right between Chase and JSN because it's not like either of those wide receivers have great quarterback play either. And actually, I don't know if I should disclose this out loud. I'm sorry, Nathan, if you wanted to keep this between us, but Nathan actually offered me Jordan Addison for Cam Scadaboo earlier this morning. And I looked at it and went, you know what? Why would I ever trade for Jordan Addison? If Justin Jefferson can't be productive in this Minnesota Vikings offense, I would rather take my shot with Cam Scadaboo now as the starting running back for the New York Giants. So I actually rejected that trade for Addison. And despite Addison being 1 week closer to coming back from a suspension, I have moved Jordan Addison down to the wide receiver 41 in my rest of season ranks, right behind like Xavier Worthy, Calvin Ridley, Keon Coleman, and right ahead of Michael Pittman Jr., Juwan Jennings, and Matthew Golden. Then going over and looking at TJ Hawkinson, you can cut TJ Hawkinson if you have decent options on the waiver wire. Like I have Hawkinson on my team. I'm going to go check the waiver wire in my league. If Harold Fannin or Juwan Johnson are out there, hell, I'm cutting TJ Hawkinson and I'm picking up the streaming tight end. I'm done with it. Now, staying in the same offense, we did get word that Aaron Jones dealing with the hamstring probably isn't going to play this week. If we're getting this confirmation already right now, it's pretty likely that Aaron Jones not only is missing this week, but this could be a multi-week injury as well. So this is going to mean that Jordan Mason skyrockets up the rankings while Aaron Jones plummets. We moved Aaron Jones down to RB 39 and we moved Jordan Mason up to RB 27. Now, another thing that I want to mention here is, while yes, we are looking at Jordan Mason doing nothing through the first 2 weeks, it was encouraging to see him get 3 targets in week 2 with 60% of the snaps. And I think his snap rate's probably going to get a lot closer to about 80% in week 3. And just based off volume alone and the majority of your formats, he's probably going to be somebody that you want in your flex spot. Now let's move this over to what we have with our next player. And that's going to be an entire offense with Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels is going to already probably miss this game. And if you go back, he actually had the knee sprain against the Green Bay Packers on Thursday night. They told us, I don't know if it was Friday or Saturday, that he was getting an MRI. I was like, okay, well, let's keep this on our radar, but don't necessarily think that it's anything massive now. But they're already prepping us on Monday that Jayden Daniels is probably going to be missing this week. So I have moved Jayden Daniels behind Jalen Hurts in my rest of season ranks. While I do think that Daniels still has an incredibly high ceiling, if he's dealing with this lower body injury, it could limit the mobility and it could limit the overall rushing upside that we get from Jayden Daniels rest of season, which again could limit this overall offense as well. So we did move Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin down to being our wide receiver 27 and our wide receiver 28 in our rest of season ranks. Obviously, Terry McLaurin's been much worse than Deebo so far through the first 2 weeks, and Deebo should get the bump up with the Austin Eckler injury. Now, looking at Zach Ertz in the same offense, Zach Ertz has been great. I mean, very few tight ends can you rely upon. Now, of course, he's come through with 2 receiving touchdowns off of 13 targets. That type of touchdown efficiency is going to be able to hold on to throughout the rest of the year. But I still have Zach Ertz as my tight end 10 at the moment. And again, as somebody that's sitting with TJ Hawkinson in my league, I would absolutely love to go through and send TJ Hawkinson for Zach Ertz at this point if I could. Now, one last thing that I really want to talk about that I haven't seen many people mention is the Carolina Panthers just lost a starting guard, and also they potentially just lost their center. So it was already an extremely shaky offense, but now with these 2 offensive line injuries, we need to lower expectations across the board. We're already seeing this with week 3 implied team totals from Vegas Sportsbooks projecting out the Carolina Panthers to be a bottom 5 offense in the league this week. We've already seen Bryce Young look pretty bad so far this season. And with these offensive line injuries, it's only going to get worse. So if I'm looking at Chuba Hubbard, while Hubbard's been great, he's averaged about 18 points per game so far this year. I am going to be moving him down to my RB 18 rest of season, even though he's a 3-down running back. Again, this is just going to be an absolute garbage offense. And then going over and looking at Tet McMillan, T-Mac, Tetaroa, whatever you want to call him. He is also a phenomenal talent. He's had 19 targets through the first 2 games of his NFL career. But frankly, I can't rank him as a wide receiver 1 just because this will project to be one of the worst offenses in the league. So we have Tet McMillan currently as our wide receiver 14 in our rest of season ranks. But obviously, I'm going to keep you posted with our rest of season rankings throughout the rest of the year. So just make sure you subscribe. We are on our path to 300,000 subscribers. And if you wanted to see our most recent rankings, they're always over there on flockfantasy.com, where you can also see how your team stacks up against your league mates. You can get the best waiver wire options available in your league specifically. You can link your sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo leagues. Just go over to flockfantasy.com with the link in the description comment section. That's completely free. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you. And if you subscribe, I'll see you in the live stream later tonight.